There is a silence that is louder than any sound. It is the silence of 120,000 men, waiting in a ditch of mud and fear, their eyes fixed on their watches. It is the silence that hangs in the air just before the world ends. This is the story of the first day of the Battle of the Somme. A day not just of battle, but of a hope so profound, its shattering would echo for generations. By the summer of 1916, the Great War had become a nightmare of stagnation. On the Western Front, two vast armies were locked in a brutal embrace, buried in hundreds of miles of trenches that stretched from the coast of Belgium to the border of Switzerland. For nearly 2 years, a decisive victory had eluded everyone. The cost in lives was already unimaginable, and the ground between the opposing lines, no man's land, had become a desolate, corpse-strewn bog of wire and shell craters. Something had to change. The Allied High Command, a coalition of British and French forces, devised a plan, a grand offensive, a massive simultaneous assault along the River Somme in France that would, they believed, punch a hole in the German lines and end the deadlock. It would be the big push, the battle that would win the war. The man tasked with leading the British part of this offensive was Field Marshal Douglas Haig. He placed his faith in a simple, brutal formula: artillery. For 7 days and 7 nights, the British Army unleashed the most ferocious bombardment the world had ever seen. Over 1.5 million shells were fired at the German positions. The earth trembled for miles around. The sky was perpetually black with smoke and dirt. The soldiers in their jump-off trenches were told that nothing could possibly survive such an inferno. The barbed wire would be cut to pieces. The German machine gun nests would be pulverized. The enemy, shell-shocked and broken, would be utterly incapable of resistance. When the British Tommies went over the top, they were told they would simply need to walk across no man's land and occupy the vacant trenches. Many were even instructed to not run, but to advance in steady, orderly lines. But in the fog of war, assumption is a dangerous thing. The reality in the German trenches was far different. The German army had spent 2 years fortifying their positions. They had dug deep. Not just trenches, but elaborate bunkers, carved 30 feet into the chalky earth, shell-proof shelters where entire companies could wait out the storm above. When the bombardment finally lifted on the morning of July 1st, the German soldiers, dazed but very much alive, scrambled up their ladders. They manned their positions. They dusted off their machine guns, the dreaded Spandaus, and they looked out across no man's land. They saw not a scarred and empty wasteland, but a vast field of destruction, still littered with uncut wire, and they saw something else. Lines. Endless, slow-moving lines of men. At 7:28 a.m., a new sound cut through the unnatural silence. Not a shell, but the shrill blast of a mine explosion under a German strongpoint. It was the signal. 2 minutes later, along a 25-mile front, officers raised whistles to their lips. That sound was the starting pistol for the bloodiest day in the history of the British Army. Men, burdened with over 60 pounds of equipment, began to climb the scaling ladders out of the trenches. They moved slowly into the open, many walking shoulder to shoulder as instructed. For a few heartbeats, there was only the sound of their boots on the mud, a surreal, almost peaceful moment. And then, the silence broke. The German machine guns opened up. The walking lines of men offered the perfect target. They were mowed down in waves. Men fell by the dozen, by the hundred. The grand advance, the big push, had instantly become a massacre. No man's land became a killing field. The hope of a morning had evaporated by breakfast time, replaced by a horror the world was only beginning to comprehend. But this was only the beginning. The whistle had blown, and there was no turning back. The battle for the Somme had begun. Dawn on July 2nd, 1916. The sun rose on a world utterly transformed. The grand strategy was in ruins. The optimism of high command was now a bitter, poisonous memory. In the first 24 hours of the Battle of the Somme, the British Army had suffered 57,470 casualties. Nearly 20,000 of them were dead, their bodies littering the field between the trenches. It was a loss so catastrophic, so incomprehensible, that it would forever scar the soul of a nation. But the machinery of war, once set in motion, is terrifyingly difficult to stop. The offensive could not be abandoned, and so, the Battle of the Somme did not end. It simply continued. It devolved from a battle of movement into a battle of attrition, a grim, grinding struggle where success was measured not in miles, but in yards, and paid for in lives by the thousands. Week after week, month after month, the battle raged on. The landscape of the Somme became a character in its own right, a hellish liquid world of chalk and clay churned into a deep, sucking muck by the endless shell fire. Men and horses drowned in it. Supplies and hope were lost to it. This was no longer a war of earth, it was a war of mud. And yet, within this abyss, humanity persisted. In the trenches, soldiers forged an existence in the face of the absurd. They wrote letters home, their words often censoring the unimaginable horror just beyond the parapet. They shared rations, jokes, and fears. They celebrated tiny victories, a successful raid, a parcel from home, a few hours of dry socks. These fragile moments of light only made the surrounding darkness seem more profound. The world was changing on the Somme, not just in the scale of slaughter, but in the technology of it. This was the first major appearance of a new, terrifying weapon, the tank. On September 15th, these hulking iron monsters lurched onto the battlefield for the first time. They were slow, unreliable, and few in number, but their effect was psychological lightning. German soldiers, seeing these alien beasts immune to small arms fire, often fled in terror. The tanks offered a glimpse of the future of warfare, a future that was impersonal, mechanical, and utterly ruthless. Finally, on November 18th, after 141 days of continuous fighting, the Battle of the Somme ended. The offensive was called off, not because of victory, but because of the weather. The winter cold and the impassable mud had finally achieved what neither army could. They stopped the fighting. The battlefield fell silent. The cost was beyond calculation. The Allies had advanced just 6 miles. The total casualties numbered over 1 million men. Over 400,000 British and Commonwealth, 200,000 French, and over 400,000 German. Each number a life interrupted, a story ended, a family shattered. So, what was it all for? Historians still debate the strategic outcome. Some argue it began the wearing down process that would ultimately break the German army. Others see it only as a futile slaughter. But perhaps the true legacy of the Somme is not found in strategy, but in memory. It was a seismic event that shattered the old world and its old notions of glory and honor. It created a lost generation and a legacy of grief that would ripple across the 20th century. It forced a profound and painful reconsideration of what we ask of our young people in the name of nations and causes. Today, the fields of the Somme are peaceful. Grass and wheat grow over the old shell craters. The trenches are slowly fading back into the earth. But the land is not silent. It is dotted with countless cemeteries and silent, haunting memorials. The Thiepval Memorial, which bears the names of over 72,000 missing British and South African men, is a monument to absence itself. They are all still there. In the rusted whistle found in a farmer's field, in the silent white headstones that stand in perfect rows like an army finally at rest, they remind us of the price of a single yard of mud. They ask us only to remember. The past is not just a series of events to be studied. It is a place of profound human experience, a place we must visit and remember so that its lessons are not lost to time. If you want to ensure these stories are never forgotten, consider supporting this channel. Subscribe to The Past Unfolded, and join us next time as we continue to explore the deepest echoes of our history.